or George Washington. It is by Jean-Antoine Houdon, a French sculptor. It is made in 1788 to 1792, and it is made of 18 tons of marble. The context for this, the broadest context, is that this statue was made during the period of Enlightenment, a period that George Washington was really one of the symbols for. George Washington lived the role of enlightened when he led the American Continental Army for 5 years against the British Empire, trying to work toward the right for people in the New World to rule themselves, not be ruled by a divine king. So he demonstrated enlightenment thinking just in his own behavior. And more context for this is that Jean-Antoine Houdon was chosen by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were both from the state of Virginia. And after the American Revolution, the state wanted to honor George Washington by having a statue made. So they contacted Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, who are still in France, and they said, hey, would you recommend somebody? Well, TJ recommended Houdon, and Houdon didn't want to just work off of a painting of George Washington that he had done by an artist named Peale. So Houdon traveled to the United States with a couple of assistants, and he went to Mount Vernon, George Washington's plantation, and there he made this bust of George Washington that you see here. He made it out of clay right there at Mount Vernon, and he gave this as a gift to George Washington. And then he made a like wax mask of George Washington, had George Washington put bird quills up his nose so that he could breathe while the wax was being formed. And then he took that wax mask back to France and created the statue that we see here. The form of this statue is that it's full-length statue of George Washington. It's considered the most accurate likeness of George Washington that exists. It is showing him in a contrapposto stance, So that means that, right, we're recalling the statues of the Greeks and the Romans. His right hand holds a walking stick, and on his left arm, he is leaning, looks like a coat, over the fasces that is here that we're going to learn more about. And then we have a sword hanging off of the fasces, and behind George Washington, there is a plow. And just want to also point out that he is wearing his military uniform from the time that he served in the Continental Army. A comparison of what could have been done of George Washington is this statue here, done in 1840, some 50 years later. This is a neoclassical statue along with ours, but this one really harkens back to the Greeks and the Romans, with George here being bare-chested, and this is just like the upper body that we see in the Sistine Chapel. So this is not what George looked like at the time, who was, in his 50s. So what did all that content mean in that statue? Well, George Washington's left arm was leaning on a fasces. A fasces is, at its most basic, seen right here. It's a bundle of sticks tied with leather, and out the top of it would be sometimes an axe. This comes from Roman and actually Etruscan as well, thinking this is a symbol for the right to rule, the right to judge. So over time, that symbol came to mean, you can see it here on Abraham Lincoln's memorial, and you can see it here on either side of the flag in the where the Secretary of, the Speaker of the House sits. So this fasces in American history has come to represent the strength in unity of the 13 colonies. there are in George Washington's statue 13 kind of rods or sticks that are being twined together. And that definitely is what it represents here at the Lincoln Memorial, where you can see on either side of his chair that he's sitting in. The fasces represents the unity of the United States, which the Civil War was all about dividing. So then knowing that this is a Roman concept, a Roman ideal, that further explains how this is a neoclassic piece. And then more content to understand is that some choices have been made about what George Washington is wearing and what he has in this statue with him. So he has three military-ish kinds of things. One is that military clothing. One is the sword, which isn't really super close to him. And then the other is this fasces, this right to rule. But then the other two things that he's got next to him are a walking stick and a plow behind his feet. And those mean that he is turning to the civilian life. So we think that this is a reference back to a Roman leader or a Roman statesman called Cincinnatus, which is where Cincinnati comes from. Cincinnatus, who retired from public life and went back to his farm. So George Washington is doing the same thing. He's really stepping away from a lot of potential power and going back to his farm. He's becoming a civilian. So the function of this piece is that it celebrates the American Revolution. It honors George Washington, probably honors George Washington more than it celebrates the American Revolution. It has been copied multiple times. Here you see a bronze copy that is inside this stele, the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. There's apparently an opening. I didn't see it, but in there was this statue of George Washington. All right, so that's George Washington by Jean-Antoine Houdon, 1788, and it's made of marble.